Welcome to Kip Through History. Wherever you are, maybe it's late, or perhaps you've just found a quiet moment to yourself. I'm glad you're here. Each episode is a slow, first-person journey through the past. Not loud or hurried, just the soft rhythm of another time. We explore what it might have felt like to live those forgotten days. To walk, to wait, to wonder. And if you'd like to share, feel free to leave a comment. Tell us where you're listening from, what time it is where you are, and perhaps what's on your mind tonight. We're building a quiet little community here, a gathering of curious sleepwalkers drifting gently through history together. So now, close your eyes or get comfortable, and let me take you somewhere far away. It was the fog I remember first, thick and heavy along the Medway, rolling low across the wooden piers at Chatham Dockyard. It softened the masts of distant vessels and made even the great iron chains of the anchor seem somehow delicate. HMS Erebus sat just ahead of me, dark-hulled and broad-backed. She was no stranger to cold, a refitted bomb vessel built for war but reworked for ice. Her timbers thickened, her hull ironclad to endure what men were not. Beside her floated Terror, older, slightly more irritable. I had sailed with both, but that morning they looked like strangers, as if even the ships weren't entirely sure they wanted to go. The Admiralty had given us our orders, the kind written in polished language but sparse on detail. Determine the position of the magnetic South Pole, it said. Chart unknown coasts. Or in plainer terms, go south until something tries to stop you. I was no stranger to cold. I'd walked Arctic shores where compasses spun like weather vanes, and the silence hung heavier than snow. But this was different. This was south. This was myth. Terra Australis Incognita. The unknown southern land. That sort of phrase gets lodged in the mind. The crew moved with quiet efficiency. Ropes coiled, tools checked, barrels counted, biscuits argued over. The usual ceremony before a very long absence. 64 men aboard Erebus, another 60 on Terror. Some had been to the poles before. Others were fresh from London, still thinking adventure would be tidy and poetic. They'd learn. Crozier, captain of Terror, trusted numbers more than fate. Where I guessed, he measured. Where I wandered, he plotted. Where I said, let's see what happens, he frowned. Joseph Hooker, our botanist, was 22 and brilliant, though consistently disappointed by the lack of flowers in polar climates. He once brought 3 kinds of fern to a glacier. Hopeful, that one. Abernethy had salt in his beards and opinions about everything. Reed claimed he could smell bergs in the fog. No one tested him. We didn't want to find out he was right. None of us were qualified for ordinary life. So instead, we went chasing the ends of the earth. The night before we sailed, my uncle, Sir John Ross, came down to the dock. He had once eaten the soles of his boots in the Arctic, and later called it unpleasant, but tolerable with mustard. He looked at Erebus, then at me, and said, "You'll go further than any man before you. Just don't try to come back better for it." Then he handed me a flask and left. I still have the flask. On the morning of September 30th, 1839, we set sail. The tide turned, the ropes fell, and the wind caught our sails with a sound like an exhale. No crowd, no band, no fanfare. Just a few wives waving from the quay, and the faint clatter of a cartwheel somewhere behind us. England slipped behind us into fog, as it often does. Part 3. Atlantic Crossing. The days fell into rhythm. Deck scrubbed, instruments calibrated, the usual sailor's liturgy of salt and repetition. I kept a log, more out of habit than duty. I tried to write down what couldn't be explained later. How the sky looked when the stars shifted into the Southern Cross. How a certain kind of wind carried silence with it. Hooker, ever hopeful, tried to grow something in a box nailed to the stern. The basil gave up first, then the mint. The rosemary held on longer than it should have. He called it botanical mutiny. Crozier checked the barometer 3 times a day. He said something was coming. I agreed, mostly to keep the conversation short. We passed Madeira, then Rio, then the Cape. And then one morning the blue changed. It lost its warmth, became sharp, hard, a kind of blue you only see when you're running out of sun. That was the first sign. Not the cold, not the ice, just the colour. Then came a smear on the horizon. Ice. At first it looked like a low cloud, then a jagged tooth. A few hours later we were among them. Real icebergs, cliffs, arches, towers, mountains that floated. One of the younger lads asked if they were alive. I said, only when you're not watching. We named them as we passed. The Bishop, the Harpoon, the Gate. One especially awkward lump got called Crozier. He didn't love it, but he let it slide. And we sailed on, toward silence, toward cold, toward a place no map had claimed. The sea narrowed with flows. It was no longer vast and open. Now it was scattered with shards and slabs, as if the ocean had begun to scab over. Erebus carved through slowly. The reinforced hull groaned, but it held. Terror followed, as she always did. Our black-lunged shadow on the water. The real ice came in bands. First, grease ice, slick and thin, more a suggestion than substance. Then brash ice, broken bits, grinding like teeth against the hull. And then the sheets, miles of it, slow, steady, patient, not a wall, just a quiet test of your willingness to keep going. Progress slowed, 3 miles a day, sometimes less. The silence settled in. Not stillness. The wind still whispered, the timbers still ached. But a deeper silence, the kind you feel in your ribs. Hooker, bless him, tried to document everything. Crystal shapes, flow patterns, how the light moved through snow. I think he needed the structure. I understood that. One night, a crack echoed through the hull, sharp enough to bring half the men on deck in their boots. Nothing came of it, just pressure shifting. But it reminded us where we were, and how little belonged to us here. On January 11th, I think it was the 11th, we sighted land, real land. Black cliffs rising from the snow. Mountains behind them, sharp as blades. From one of them, smoke drifted. A volcano. Alive. It froze us more than the ice ever could. Volcanoes in the Antarctic. It was absurd. And yet, there it was, steaming like a kettle on Sunday. We named it Mount Erebus, after our ship. And the quieter one beside it, Mount Terror. There was something oddly comforting about naming mountains, as if they might remember us. We traced the coast slowly. I called it Victoria Land, in honour of the young Queen. Felt only fair. She'd signed off on the voyage, though I doubt she imagined volcanoes. Every ridge and inlet we passed, every berg we avoided, It all became part of something larger. A coastline no one had drawn before. A continent that many still doubted even existed. And here we were, sketching its edge with frozen fingers and fogged up instruments. Crozier kept watching the compass. It had started to misbehave. The needle twitched and drifted. Even the Earth's lost its bearings, he muttered. I didn't correct him. He wasn't wrong. Eventually the ice began to close behind us. The window was shutting. The southern summer had peaked. Even the light seemed tired. We turned north, reluctantly, back through the pressure ridges, past the bergs we'd named and half forgotten. The Petrels returned. Albatross too. Hooker cried when he saw the first one. The men stopped wearing gloves indoors. The ship creaked less. We breathed deeper. Most evenings I stood at the bow, watched the sun fall into the sea, thought about the lines we'd drawn on the map, how long they'd last, whether someone would follow them. I never thought of it as conquest, more like permission. We had been permitted to see something, and now it was time to leave. The South doesn't keep you. It just lets you pass, if you're polite. I wrote in my journal, distance is not the enemy here. The enemy is forgetting what it felt like to be so far away. That night I slept well. The ship hummed beneath me. The sea breathed its long, tired sigh, and the southern lights faded behind us, quiet as a prayer. The passage north was not quick. The sea, it seemed, was in no great hurry to return us. And truth be told, neither was I. There's a kind of stillness that settles in after time in the south. A quiet that gets into your bones and stays there. You move slower, you speak less, not from fatigue, but from reverence. As if too much noise might wake something you'd rather let sleep. We made for Hobart, Van Diemen's Land then. Tasmania now, a small harbour town wrapped in mist, where the hills rise like old shoulders shrugging off the sea. We arrived in early April, and I wasn't prepared for the violence of colour. The green was too green, the sky was too blue, trees moved in ways that ice never does. Even the people startled me. Voices that hadn't been cold for months, laughter that came too easily. They moved fast, too fast, like we'd been sleeping and the world hadn't waited. We stayed just long enough to refit, resupply, report. Hooker made a nuisance of himself at every garden in town. Crozier rewrote charts, avoided questions. I tried to write a proper account, but every time I started I found myself staring out at the harbour, wondering how the light looked down south that morning. Then winter came, and the Admiralty sent new orders. We were to go again, one more summer run to the ice, more coastline to chart, more readings to take. I nodded as if it surprised me, but the truth is, I'd already turned south in my head before the ink dried. We passed again through the belt of ice. This time, we knew what to expect. The fields, the stillness, the silence broken only by the creak of timber or the groan of shifting floes. And yet, it still found new ways to unsettle us. The cold felt different that second season, sharper, less theatrical, more personal. It got into the joints, into the thoughts. Some men started talking in their sleep. Fragments of dreams, bits of home. Others said nothing at all. We reached new coasts, saw new peaks. Some had no name, so we gave them one. Names that felt almost silly out there, as if language itself had grown soft. One morning the wind dropped to nothing. The sea lay flat as pewter. The ice barely moved, and we were trapped, not dramatically, but passively, as though the world had stopped noticing us. I walked the deck that day, heard the stillness pressing in. It was so quiet I could hear the blood in my own head. That was the first time I felt the weight of it. Not fear, not awe. Just the realization that this place would still be here long after we were not. Hooker called it sublime. Abernethy called it something less repeatable and went to make more tea. We turned north again in early February. The light had changed. Edges looked sharper. Everything a little more brittle. It was time. That second return felt different. Not relief, not joy. More like stepping into someone else's life. The world looked softer somehow. Noisy, colourful, moving too quickly. I met with governors, naval officers, men in crisp coats who asked careful questions and nodded at my answers. They liked words like discovery and accomplishment, as though those were things you could wrap up and carry home. But I kept thinking about the silence, the weight of a glacier face towering into sky, the way the compass spun as we neared the pole, like a gentleman tipping his hat to something older than rules. We returned to England in late summer, 1843. The Thames looked small, the sky less vast. People asked about volcanoes, sea monsters, and medals. I answered what I could, said the right things, but part of me never quite came back. I think that's true of all of us. Once you've stood in that kind of stillness, white from horizon to horizon, it's hard to adjust to noise. I still have the journals, and the charts, and the flask from my uncle, but they're just tokens, fragments. The real thing, it's still down there, still moving, still waiting. Sometimes I dream I'm back there. The ice creaks, the sails fill, the compass spins, and I just stand at the rail, smiling as the world disappears behind me again. The house I live in now is small, too warm sometimes, full of clocks that behave themselves, and windows that show no ice. It's quiet here, but not the same kind. Not that southern quiet, not the kind you have to earn. I still rise early, old habits, make tea, walk a little, read letters from people I barely remember. Some days I take out the old charts, unfold them on the table, just to remind myself that coastline was once mine to draw. Visitors ask what it was like. I never quite know how to answer. It's not the ice I remember first. It's the waiting. The slow way things revealed themselves. The trust you had to place in what you could not see. They think it must have been cold, frightening. And yes, it was. But it was also peaceful. The cold was clean, honest. The danger didn't whisper. It stood plainly in front of you. And you nodded at it like an old acquaintance. The hardest part wasn't the fear. It was the beauty. The kind that doesn't ask your permission. That just is. I once stood for nearly 2 hours, watching sunlight move across a berg, shaped like a ruined chapel. Didn't speak, didn't write it down. There was nothing to add. I still think of them, the others. Crozier went back to sea. Hooker went on to great things. His letters still come now and then, mostly about moss. He never really forgave that failed herb garden. I haven't seen most of them in years, but I think if you asked them, they'd say the same thing. It wasn't the distance. It wasn't the ice. It was being part of something that didn't need us. but let us pass through anyway. They say we were explorers, that we charted the last true frontier, but the truth is, the ice didn't need us. It was there long before, and it will be there long after. Sometimes I imagine Erebus is still out there, not wrecked, not trapped, just sailing, quietly, pulled by something older than wind. I like to think if I stepped aboard again, she'd know the weight of my boots, and if I stood at the bow, right where the ice meets the sky, the world would fall silent again, and I'd know exactly where I was. And thank you for sharing these whispers of the past with me. Rest well, and join me again soon